Hello, and thank you all for joining us again here today on Hessens County for another TTRPG talk. This video series takes a look at tabletop role playing games and related materials, makes suggestions for your own games, and takes a look at some of my own materials. Today, we're going to be discussing a genre that I feel doesn't get as much play. And that would be basically Bronze Age games, especially those that have a setting either directly in or inspired by Babylonians, Akkadians, the Mycenaean Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, all of that kind of stuff, the Hittites. Um, so all of those types of sort of cultures and civilizations in that region of the world. And I have played or taken a look at a number of games in this setting. Most of them aren't very well known. The ultimate famous when it comes to this particular genre and style would be RuneQuest. The setting of Glorantha is definitely the first one that would come to mind for me whenever someone mentions Bronze Age or early Iron Age or that type of a game sort of setting. And of course, there are other ones like Aegon. Um, that this one particular taking place in Greece that have again similar vibes, similar settings of this sort of Bronze Age civilization. However, there's one that has begun kickstarting that I think in many ways definitely encapsulates the feel of the period while also in particular focusing in on the sorts of mythologies and the myths and the legends that kind of are developed and are built around inside of those particular civilizations. And that would be the game Defy the Gods. So, for those of you who are not familiar with this game, this is a game that is set in a Mesopotamian city that you actually create yourself as a part of the setup for the world. You and your party uh, basically create the world together collectively as part of like a session zero. And again, this is sort of a queer sword and sorcery. So you and the other people who are playing, the other characters who are playing in this story, um, are in many ways, in one form or another, a type of outcast inside of this civilization. You don't quite fit in. And you essentially are having to fight against it refers to as a world. I think it's world focuses, if I remember correctly. So, for example, deities, but also other leaders, other powerful leaders, like leaders, city leaders in city administration, stuff like that. Um, in many ways, you're combating against them. So, in the process of fighting against these things, you're also gaining powers that, in many ways, are kind of twisting you. They're essentially twisting your character to kind of to be what you're fighting against to a certain extent, but also it makes you more powerful. So you're trying to balance that connection of relationships with human beings and maintaining your humanity while also obviously having to become powerful enough that you can combat against the forces that you are attempting to essentially overthrow or at least to change in order to make things better. So here it specifically mentions that this is inspired by things like Clash of the Titans, Princess Mononoke, and Conan. There are definitely elements in here that reminded me of a number of characters from, for example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and some other stories and legends about Mesopotamian deities or human beings who got wrapped up and involved in their world. So yeah, there's definitely a feeling there, and also because again we're talking about individuals who exist in this Mesopotamian setting and world. They're obviously going to have connections and relationships with one another. So, of course, is actually mechanically in the game. It's building those relationships and bonds with one another. And again, this is kind of building on the sort of bond system that already existed in Powered by the Apocalypse games, but like dialed to 11, it feels like to me. So, for example, there's lots of influences that are being pulled in here from things like Thirsty Sword Lesbians, or Apocalypse Keys and some other things like that. So, there's a number of those kind of being pulled into this. So, as I mentioned, there are playbooks. and in the Defy the Gods, and you'll actually see physical representations here on the screen of each of those. So just kind of going clockwise from the top, working your way around. We have the vessel, which essentially is an individual who is acts as a medium or some sort of vessel, of course, as the name suggests, for a minor deity. Then we have, of course, the sorcerer, and the sorcerer, in many ways, possesses these powers that are somewhat unnatural um, in the world, and that basically it, they're basically trying to work against, again, sort of like the powers that sort of make up the world. We have the sword, who indulges in violence, um, as the name would suggest, but your particular character, in many ways, is trying to hold back some from that violence and, engaging in maintaining that relationship with their humanity, while the world forces are trying to kind of pull them into just sort of indulging in that violence and sort of lashing out against everyone, and including harming, of course, the ones that they love and care about, which of course would be antithetical to that sort of like trying to protect the world. The Wolfling, again, this is the character, kind of reminds me of the Endiku, who's like the wild person, the person who grew up or were raised outside of civilization. The next one we have around is the Revenant, which is someone who's come back from the dead, come back from the underworld for some reason. And the Revenant is being slowly chased by, is being chased down by these demons that are essentially trying to drag them back down to the underworld. And then the last one there is the Sailor, and for that you can think of like Sinbad the Sailor or something along those lines, where they're they're constantly traveling, highly romantic, um, but also having a hard time maintaining strong roots in a certain place or stuff like that. So, in many ways, these fulfill a lot of the sort of stereotypes that you might see, stereotypical roles rather, that you might see in certain legends or stories. From this particular time period, especially in this region, that of course fit really well with the sorts of playbooks of somebody being outside of the particular civilization or the community, uh, but still playing a role in it as a part of sort of creating the world. Before the start of the game, you actually build out the antagonists, because again, the sort of world forces, these mythological forces that you're potentially going up against, whether they're deities or other beings, that you're having to interact with or fight against, um, you're essentially creating them along with the city and the wilds around it and stuff like that. Another thing that exists here is that the basic concept is that there's some sort of like pre-human civilization called the Atlanteans, which of course is a reference to the myth of Atlantis. Um, Basically, they existed before you, but were destroyed by the world forces, the pantheon that you create at the beginning of the story. Um, and then, of course, you also create the underworld, which your characters may or may not end up being going into, or may have fled from if you're a revenant. Um, and then finally, one thing that I felt was really interesting about this particular game is that essentially, um, every time you come to the end of an adventure, you actually play out a scene as one of the world forces, so that you essentially you're utilizing the antagonists to create the next scenario, um to basically begin the framing for the next scenario. So think about like some TV shows or episodic stories. um we come to the end of the story, yay, the heroes are successful, blah blah blah, and then we flash to like the big bad evil person, and then we see whatever the next plot is, the beginnings of that, or like how they react to what the heroes did during the course of the story. As players, you're creating the beginnings of what then the game master will take on in the next session as being like the plan or the bad thing that's going to be happening to them or the world or whatever. So again, this is a Kickstarter. So they're going to be running for another couple of weeks. You'll notice that they're pretty far away from their goal, which was incredibly ambitious. I'm surprised they were tried shooting for a goal this big. Um, but we'll see what happens. I definitely would encourage you to try at least checking this out and see if this is the kind of thing that you would like. There are a huge number of people involved in this project. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to kind of scroll through them all, but the big one I did want to point out is Chrys, who you may know from creating Raccoon Sky Pirates, and they are the creator and sort of like the of this concept and setting, and they're from Columbus, Ohio. Yay, go Ohio! Um, but yeah, it's definitely. I'm just gonna kind of scroll through this kind of slowly as I keep talking, but like, there's a huge number of people involved in this project. I definitely recommend that you go ahead and check out the page if you want to see who all might be involved. Obviously a huge number of artists, researchers, um, cultural consultants, and so on. One thing that they do note is that the game it feels mostly done. Um, and they do dive into what their plan is for printing and manufacturing and tariffs and what they might do for that and shipping and everything. So, one other thing that is important to note is that plus one EXP. So Tony Vicenza, all of them, they are going to be handling fulfillment for this. So you have a good person handling that, especially for here in the United States. If you're still not sure whether or not you want to get the game, one thing that is important to note is that they do have essentially a quick start or like a sample that exists here on itch.io. So links for this from Hectic Electron will be found down below. Along, of course, with the link to the Kickstarter page. But yeah, so in this package, they have the playbooks. So again, we have. I'm not going to go through all of them all over again, but this is just to give you a basic idea of what's going on here. So basically, as you create your character, as I mentioned, there's a relationship system, which is represented here by the hearts. The fire track is whenever you are becoming too closely associated or you're doing things that result in basically building up essentially like I guess your equivalent of godlike power. um that then as you build up too much, then you potentially end up gaining uh flipping your epithets, which are basically things that describe your character and describe the motivations of your character. Uh, those can essentially be overridden and stuff by when you defy the gods, and you end up collecting dooms essentially. And if you collect all your dooms, all your epithets flip into dooms, then basically your character becomes what you were fighting against, and you end up becoming one of the world forces that the rest of the group is fighting against. And your character is now an NPC, and you have to start a new one essentially. Um, and then of course, like most other um, Powered by the Apocalypse games, we of course have our various specialized playbook moves for each of the classes, and then there's also special sort of downtime actions, and the Doom moves are things that you pick up as you are. Um, Marking dooms on your epithets. Another thing that they have included here is, let me get rid of that real quick. These are sort of like a basic summarized version of the actual world creation before you start. So, of course, here we are creating the pantheon or the set of deities that your characters are going to be essentially competing against. So you're going to have a name and then the four different domains that each character in the Pantheon is going to be in charge of. We have the actual city itself. So again, you could obviously pick or just create brand new things. So, um, what's the rulers, what's the city known for, location, name, the patron, um, landmarks, unique things about the city, laws, uh, coinage, other things that your character is going to be interacting with on a regular basis, or that would be important for developing different things or aspects inside this city. Um, then, of course, you also build the civilization around, or the sort of the wildlands around your city. So again, we use hexes, and you take turns placing things in and stuff, and also creating whatever the local Atlantis civilization had or stuff like that, and the sorcery that uh, they essentially sort of brought into the world. Um, and then whatever the local Atlantean ruin is like and what's there and stuff like that. And then of course the underworld, which would be very important for like the Revenant, or of course if any of your characters later end up becoming involved in stuff like that, like death and having to associate with the whoever is in charge of the underworld. And then, of course, there's basic rules. So again, I mentioned the epithets, which have certain powers and give you bonuses whenever you're utilizing them. So in many ways, you could think of this as like identities in some of the games that I've created, um, or stuff like that. I already mentioned the fire track and gaining dooms. The rest of this works very similar to most other Powered by the Apocalypse games that you are aware of. So, like for example, you're on the adventure, and then when you're done, you're having downtime, and your character can do certain things during downtimes. Um, and then, of course, an additional thing that sort of happens in the downtime is that world scene that I mentioned, where the world forces are essentially setting up for the next adventure. And then, of course, they list out the various basic moves: glowing success, burning success, misses. So those are just the three different types of, like, a hit, strong hit, weak hit, miss. Yeah, and they kind of sort the moves into a couple of different aspects. So moves of might of cunning are just like your standard stuff, in addition to obviously whatever's on your playbook. Um, Heart moves are things that are actually involving relationships with other people. Immortal moves are things that you essentially are acting against the world force, or asking for their help, because sometimes I guess various aspects of the world force might be working against each other. One thing here that I think is really interesting amongst the heart moves is actually this one right here, name me. So it says here, if you have 4 hearts. So again, when you have bonds or relationships with other characters in Powered by the Apocalypse games, your bond can get stronger or weaker over time. And once it gets stronger to a certain point, then usually to reset to 0, and then you build it up again. Um, but in any case, if you have 4 hearts with another character, then you can it says here, you can get a special insight from them, something that even they don't know. So ask their player what it is, and then offer them a new epithet to reflect it. Um, so then the player will then write down the new epithet on their character sheet and the blank spells on the blank slot, and then the hearts reduce from then 4 to 1. So basically, building up relationships is actually really important, because these epithets can then help empower uh, your character. It can add new aspects and new things in the identity of your character. So these epithets start off at 0, so they don't give you a bonus. But of course, you can then build those up, make them more powerful through, I'm assuming, probably spending experience points, or um, maybe those relationships can also help develop that as well. At least from what all I have seen so far, this looks like a really interesting way to do it. I'm usually not the biggest a fan of Powered by the Apocalypse games, but I think that this system, this structure, this setup, I think really fits this particular type of game and genre pretty well. The types of, like, myth or legend building stories that this system is attempting to sort of create and develop, especially that relationship and bond building, is really a key to both Powered by the Apocalypse core, but also the extra layers that have been added to it through the various other inspirations that Defy the Gods is pulling from. So again, That is Defy the Gods. They are set up for their Kickstarter that's going to be going on for 24 more days as of the time I'm recording. So that means that the campaign will be ending at some point on uh, Thursday, May 29th. Wherever you are in the world, it'll probably be ending at some point during that day. um, or, the beginning of, I guess, the day after that. But anyway, um, yeah, they still have a long way to go, unfortunately, at this point. But I feel like this is a game where if it got backed, I feel would really go far, and definitely would be a really great setting, especially for people who do enjoy things like RuneQuest or who do enjoy things like, the Thirsty Sword Lesbians or other games that are built really heavily around a myth and relationships and stuff like that. Um, so, again, thank you for joining me again here today. Links will be found in the doobly doo down below to the Kickstarter page, and of course that quick start or preview that link that I shared earlier. Don't forget to rate your itch purchases. Speaking of which, and have a good zone.